This segment explores the hypothesis that Olmec sculptures were often set into groups, and that these groups functioned as tableaux or stage sets, integrating the sculptures into a scene from a story that would have been well known to the Olmec, but which is largely lost to us today. Let us take for our example La Vinta Offering 4, dating from the Middle Preclassic period, or circa 1200 to 400 BC. Here we see a large group of single figures, organized into a semicircle that is focused on one figure towards the center of the group. Most studies of Olmec art focus on a single one of these figures, defining the central iconographic features such as the elongated head, the almond eyes, and the particular stance that includes the arms hanging to the side and the knees slightly bent. Or one can focus on the value of the material. These are done exclusively in precious greenstone varieties, which together were considered the most valuable material in all of Mesoamerica at the time. Or one could focus on the work required to deftly shape this hard material into such elegant, monumental forms with an exceptional finish. All of these approaches are valid and say something important about the meaning and significance of the individual piece, but none of them explain the grouping or the presence of 6 jade cells in the background. Although we don't know exactly what this grouping might mean, we do know that it was fundamental to the meaning of these sculptures. La Vinta Offering 4 is not exceptional in its emphasis on a grouping. Many Olmec sculptures were placed in groups, or tableaux, as Anne Cyphers has argued. Scholars use the term tableau because they believed that the grouping of the sculptures told a story, much like the grouping of characters in a play or a movie does. It takes nothing away from this hypothesis that in fact we often don't know the story to which the grouping refers, because it is so clear that the grouping itself is meaningful. Take the El Azul pieces to the left in this slide, where 2 young male figures face a jaguar seated in a human-like pose. Obviously, these figures are interacting in a meaningful way, but we no longer have the story that the original audience would have understood as forming the larger context. There are further difficulties in identifying the stories that formed the larger context. We don't always know the original context of these sculptures. Take, for example, the colossal head on your right, which these type of sculptures were often moved or mutilated or transformed into a completely different sort of sculpture, like the throne or some combination of the above. But to reiterate our major point, we do know that quite a few were set into pairs or groups. Again, these groups seem to function not unlike La Vinta Offering 4 did, as clues to some sort of narrative that the audience would have grasped, but is more difficult for us, who lack the Olmec oral tradition where these stories developed. Finally, I want to take the idea of tableau one step further, to the idea that much Olmec art was theatrical. One could say that everything the Olmec did in the center of their cities was theatrical. Theatrical in the sense that the sculptures were viewed as if they were on stage, interacting with each other, and perhaps with the elite who would be performing religious rituals that included dance and other performance on the hallowed ground of the city center. So that they could interact with each other and with current humans, it may have been that the Olmec considered their sculptures to be somehow alive, although we have much more evidence for this from the later classic Maya and other Mesoamericans. The basic point is, to understand the meaning of Olmec sculpture, one must see them in a stage set. In the example before you, here at the center of La Vinta, imagine the colossal heads that had come to rest in a row near the entry of this sacred precinct, just outside this image to the right, while La Vinta Offering 4 and the enormous mosaic pavements were underfoot, hallowing the central area and giving the space a sacred charge, as Kent Riley argues in a work you've read closely. Finally, the more public precinct to the left had large stone stela with low-relief images of the rites that would have been actually performed for the large public in these very spaces.